Hey, what's up guys? Rob Arnold here. So a few days ago, a buddy of mine, Aaron Prentice, sent me a message over on Patreon saying this. Hey, have you ever considered doing a video where you talk about the different amps you've used throughout your career? I know you've been using 6505s for the most part since they came out, but I've always been curious on what you did before those days, like with those old Yamahas. And I said that I hadn't considered that, but I will now. But I'd have to think of a way to make it interesting because I sold off a lot of those amps over the past few years and I just wasn't using them. And so basically I just have to talk about them and maybe show images of the amps rather than being able to physically show them off and jam on them. And then I asked if he thought that that would still be interesting and worth it. He said he'd definitely be interested and thought that a lot of the community would be as well. He says, the way gear talk is these days, I think people can nerd out and talk about it without even demoing it, and it will still hold people's interest. I just saw one of Ryan Bruce's videos earlier where he talked to Coley for like 30 minutes just about the history of dual rectifiers. So he thinks it'd be really interesting. So I said, okay, and I'll put it on my list. And so I've spent some time putting together a little timeline here, detailing the history of every amp I've ever owned and all the amps we used in Chimaira. I'm gonna tell stories about them, give details about every single one, what happened to them, where they are now. So let's get into the history of my amplifiers, starting with my very first. It all started with my first little practice combo amp, the PV Rage 108. I got this amp when I was 9 or 10 years old and jammed on it in bedrooms and garages until I was about 15, when I saved up enough money to buy my first real amp, a Crate half stack. I bought this amp used from my local music shop for about 450 bucks, if I remember, and this is what I used while jamming with drummers and other dudes from my neighborhood. The head was a G1600 XL, and I don't know what crate model the cabinet was. I used this amp all the way until I joined Chimaira when I was 19, and then after a few months, I traded it in towards the purchase of my first brand new half stack that I would use with Chimaira for another year or so. And a side note, a few years ago, I repurchased a used Crate G1600 XL from eBay, the same model I had, just for nostalgia's sake. Many of you have seen it in many of my recent videos, but unfortunately something happened and it's no longer working. So that first brand new half stack I purchased after joining Chimaira was my Marshall Valve State VS100 and a 1960 vintage cab, which I still own today. It's sitting right next to me here, as a matter of fact. This was my writing, rehearsal, and gigging amp with Chimaira until we scored a record contract. And then the endorsement opportunities started coming our way. I love this amp a lot and still do, but over the years, my rig would continue to evolve, and that brings us to the next chapter. After signing that record deal with Roadrunner Records and heading out to California to record our debut album, Pass Out of Existence, the first amplifier company we were approached by was Yamaha. The Yamaha guys came out to the studio where we were recording one day and brought us some half stacks. The heads were DG130Hs, and they were super cool because all the knobs were automated. They would move on their own depending on how you set it up. It was a digital amp and you could store tons of presets which could be instantly recalled with a push of a button. And you'd see all the knobs move positions automatically right before your eyes. This was a super cool feature and allowed us to program multiple presets for whatever sound we were looking for. The amps were paired with Yamaha S412V cabs. The cabs were loaded with Celestion Vintage 30s and they sounded great. I still own mine today. Also, the DG130H was one of the amps used to create our guitar sound on Pass Out of Existence. I believe it was blended with a Line 6 and a triple rectifier, which were both amps provided to us for use by the studio at that time. From there, Chimaira entered the tube amp world when I started gigging with Chimaira singer Mark Hunter's original PV5150. This thing was loud as hell, sounded amazing, and crushed any of the solid state amps we had been using in the past. I only gigged it for a short while until it started having issues and needed repair. Coincidentally though, at that same time, some of the guys from PV reached out to us and offered us an endorsement. This was a dream come true. They supplied both Matt DeVries and I with a couple 5152s, which paired beautifully with the Mesa Boogie cabinets we started using like a year or so earlier. We owned 4 of these at the time, and they became our cabinets of choice from there on out. The 5152s were also the amps used to record Chimaira's sophomore album, The Impossibility of Reason. After a short while, PV switched the 5150 moniker to the 6505, and they sent us a few of those so we could promote the new title every night from the stage, and we basically retired the 5152s to the rehearsal room. The 6505 and Mesa Cab combination became known as the Chimaira rig of choice and is heavily associated with our guitar tone. If you haven't seen it, I made a video demonstrating this rig and play a bunch of riffs through it while describing how I set it up in the video, which I've linked for you guys in the description below. I still own a few of these 6505s and use them regularly. They're a great amp that I totally recommend for heavy metal riffing. Throughout the years, there were various other amps we owned and used for different things. Around 2005, we were sent a couple amps from a German company called Engel. I received a Powerball, and Matt received a Savage 120, both first generation. We liked the way these amps sounded and used them for a bunch of stuff around that time, but there were a couple reasons they never fully replaced the PVs for us. One was that, to us, they sounded exactly like the PV amps. And since we already had a full endorsement from PV, there was no real reason to rock that boat. The other reason for me personally was that I didn't like the Engel interface. There were just too many controls. The foot switch also looked like something from like the World War II era and just wasn't very attractive to me. I ended up selling this amp a few years ago. So now at this point, probably around 2006, 2007, we were set and happy using the PV 6505s for everything we were doing. But PV reached out and asked if we'd be interested in trying a couple other amps from their lineup. I received the JSX, which is the signature amp from guitar virtuoso Joe Satriani. This was definitely a cool amp, but again, didn't sway me away from the 6505. It sounded extremely similar and didn't offer any additional features that made me want to use it full time. PV also sent us some triple X's to try out, but again, same story. I don't know what it is, but to me, all PV amps sound the same. Nothing wrong with that because they sound killer, right? But the coolest thing was the mod my buddy George did on one of the triple X's I gave him or sold him. Can't remember. Look at this thing, just super cool with the white Tolex, custom wood grain faceplate, and custom lights and knobs. He may have made some tube modifications as well, but it's the appearance that impresses me. I ended up getting rid of my JSX and the triple X's a few years ago, but they were definitely cool for what they were. I've got one more cab too that I'll give honorable mention to, and that's a kind of one-off almighty cab from bestronix.com. Bestronix, or btpa.com, is a cable manufacturing company. They do guitar cables, speaker cables, like anything you can think of. Custom stuff, they're just the best. And they supplied Chimaira and me with all of our cabling needs for years. Great company, great people, and I recommend their products 100%. Anyway, they gave me this cab when I came by their factory one day, and I love it. It's got some Lushan 30s, and it's built right into its own road case, which is super cool. Use this cab all the time. And so that's it, guys. I think that covers it all. I may have forgotten 1 or 2 amps here or there along the way. There were a lot of them, but I think this pretty much covers it. And if you love amps or Chimaira history, I really hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did and made it this far, I really appreciate you. Please give the video a thumbs up, share it with your buddies, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I've got loads more guitar-related info and tutorials here on the channel, as well as my very own guitar instructional DVD and my Kemper tone pack, all of which you can find links for in the description below. Really appreciate everyone's support. If you're interested in supporting at a greater level or seeing more exclusive stuff and greater perks, make sure you check out my Patreon campaign, which would be a big help to me, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, I know you'll find some cool stuff in there that you'll dig. So check that out at patreon.com/RobArnoldWorld. Thanks so much, guys. Again, appreciate everybody's support, interest, and viewership. Cheers, and I'll see you on the next one.